XRP holders, lean in and listen carefully, because what you are about to hear is not speculation, it is not hopium, and it is absolutely not something CNBC or Bloomberg will ever put on your screen, because Ripple has just quietly deployed a strategy so calculated, so disruptive, that it threatens the entire legacy financial order. And if you blink, you will miss the moment history pivots, because while retail is distracted by noise and meme narratives, Ripple is moving chess pieces behind closed doors with regulators, central banks, and institutions that control trillions. And yes, I am talking about names like BlackRock, the IMF, the BIS, the World Bank, and even the SEC itself. So ask yourself right now, why does Ripple suddenly look calm while the rest of crypto is panicking? Why are executives speaking with confidence bordering on arrogance? And why are doors opening that were welded shut just 2 years ago? Because this changes everything, and once you see the full picture, you will never look at XRP the same way again. And before we go any further, if you are an XRP holder or even remotely exposed to this ecosystem, you need to hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and smash the like button right now, because the information in this video is time sensitive and the algorithm actively suppresses content that threatens the status quo, and you do not want to be the person who hears about this after the move has already happened. Now, here is the setup that nobody is spelling out for you. Ripple is no longer playing defense. They are no longer reacting to regulators or market cycles. They have flipped the script and gone fully offensive, deploying infrastructure, legal positioning, and institutional alignment simultaneously, a three-pronged strategy that historically only appears right before mass adoption events. And if that sounds dramatic, ask yourself why former regulators are suddenly consulting for crypto firms, why the narrative around compliance has softened, and why XRP is being mentioned in rooms where retail is never invited. Because Ripple is positioning XRP not as a speculative asset, but as critical financial plumbing, the kind that governments cannot ignore and banks cannot operate without. And the most shocking part is this was planned years ago, while the market laughed, while influencers mocked, and while fear campaigns tried to convince you XRP was finished. So stay locked in, do not skip ahead, because in the next part we are going to break down the data, the documents, and the authority signals that prove this strategy is real, active, and already unfolding in real time. Understood? Now brace yourself, because this is where the narrative completely collapses and the receipts start stacking up. Because when you strip away the noise and actually look at the data points, the regulatory signals, and the authority figures circling Ripple right now, the picture becomes uncomfortably clear. And this is exactly why mainstream media refuses to connect these dots for you. Because Ripple's strategy is hiding in plain sight, starting with the legal and regulatory chessboard, where the SEC case was never just about penalties or labels. It was a stress test, a controlled detonation designed to force clarity. And notice how after years of uncertainty, the language from regulators has shifted from hostile to procedural, from threats to frameworks. And that does not happen by accident, especially when you consider that former SEC officials, former Treasury advisors, and compliance architects tied to the IMF and World Bank have either publicly praised Ripple's approach or quietly moved into advisory roles across the crypto regulatory landscape. Now ask yourself, why would institutions that thrive on control suddenly tolerate, even encourage, a system like XRP unless it was already being folded into their long-term plans? And here is where the authority signals get impossible to ignore, because Ripple's partnerships are no longer flashy press releases. They are infrastructure-level integrations, on-demand liquidity corridors expanding in regions aligned with IMF development goals, central bank digital currency pilots that mirror XRP ledger capabilities, and messaging compatibility with ISO 2022. A standard backed by the BIS that BlackRock, JP Morgan, and central banks are actively migrating toward. And if you think that is coincidence, then you are not paying attention. Because historically, every asset that aligned with new global financial standards before rollout saw explosive repricing once implementation went live. And Ripple executives know this, which is why their messaging has become surgical, calm, almost smug, because they are no longer pitching XRP to retail. They are briefing briefing institutions, and the data supports this shift. Wallet activity shows accumulation patterns that do not match retail behavior. Liquidity routing is being tested in low volatility windows, and corridors are being stress tested for scale, the exact same way Swift upgrades were tested decades ago before global adoption. And here is the part that should make your stomach drop. While influencers scream about price and short-term candles, Ripple is locking in relevance, embedding XRP into systems where price discovery comes last, not first, because once usage becomes mandatory, valuation is no longer optional, and that is why names like BlackRock keep appearing in adjacent conversations, not because they tweeted about XRP, but because their funds, standards, and settlement requirements align perfectly with what Ripple has built. So ask yourself this extreme question: what happens to XRP's price when compliance risk is neutralized, institutional pathways are active, and governments need liquidity that settles instantly across borders? Because that is not a pump scenario, that is a repricing event. And in the next part, we are going to expose the exact catalyst Ripple is waiting for and dismantle the fear, uncertainty, and doubt that has been deliberately weaponized to keep weak hands out before that trigger is pulled. Good, because this is the section they hope you never hear. The catalyst, the trigger point, the moment where Ripple's quiet positioning collides with public reality and forces the market to reprice violently. And at the same time, we are going to dismantle the most persistent FUD that has been intentionally injected to shake you out before that moment arrives. Because make no mistake, fear is the tool of accumulation, and XRP has been one of the most aggressively targeted assets in financial history. Now let's talk catalyst first, because Ripple's strategy hinges on convergence, not hype. Regulatory clarity, liquidity demand, and institutional readiness all hitting at once. And the market has been conditioned to believe catalysts are announcements or partnerships. But real catalysts are operational deadlines, standards migrations, and regulatory finality. And right now, all three are lining up. ISO 2022 migration windows are active. Cross-border settlement systems are being modernized under pressure from global debt stress, and regulators are being forced to choose between innovation and irrelevance. And Ripple sits directly in the center of that storm. Because XRP is not competing with memes or layer 2s, it is competing with outdated correspondent banking, and that is why the real catalyst will not be a tweet. It will be a switch flip, a corridor activation, a mandate, something boring sounding that moves trillions overnight. And when that happens, liquidity has to come from somewhere. And this is where the FUD collapses, because the loudest attacks against XRP have always followed the same script. Too centralized. Founders hold too much. Banks will never use it. Regulators hate it, and every single one of those narratives is now cracking simultaneously. Decentralization arguments crumble when you realize the XRPL has been operating for over a decade without downtime, while supposedly decentralized networks halt under load. Supply arguments fall apart when you look at escrow transparency versus opaque tokenomics elsewhere. Bank adoption FUD evaporates when you see live corridors and pilot programs aligned with IMF financial inclusion goals, and regulatory hatred turns into regulatory engagement when lawsuits end and frameworks begin. And ask yourself this: if XRP was truly a threat to be eliminated, why wasn't it banned outright? Why was it dragged through court instead? Because court creates precedent, and precedent creates permission. And that is the part retail was never supposed to understand. The pain was the process, the suppression was the opportunity, and the silence now is the warning, because markets are quietest right before repricing events, and the final layer of FUD, the one designed to hit you emotionally, is price stagnation. The idea that because XRP has not moved, it never will, but history is brutal on that assumption. Because assets tied to infrastructure do not trend. They step, they revalue when violent bursts, and Ripple knows this, institutions know this, and smart money positions before, not after. And in the next part, we are going to do the unthinkable. We are going to justify the price scenarios that sound insane today, explain how they become mathematically plausible tomorrow, and issue a final warning about what happens to those who wait for confirmation instead of conviction. Now, brace yourself, because what I am about to lay out will sound insane if you are still thinking in retail terms, but it is brutally rational if you understand infrastructure adoption, regulatory alignment, and liquidity dynamics. And here is the truth. XRP's price is no longer hostage to speculation, hype cycles, or Twitter pump narratives. It is tethered directly to the activation of corridors, the scaling of cross-border liquidity, and the migration of global payment rails to ISO 2022 standards, which is exactly why mathematically, and yes, I mean brutally, painfully precise math, the potential for XRP to move multiples from current levels is not only plausible, it is inevitable once adoption triggers a line, because trillions in transactional volume are waiting to be settled. Trillions that cannot be processed through legacy SWIFT without risk, latency, and cost. And ask yourself, if BlackRock, Santander, JP Morgan, and central banks suddenly need a real-time settlement solution that already exists and is battle-tested, what happens to XRP when it becomes indispensable? Because indispensability creates price floors and volatility ceilings, and Ripple has positioned it to be exactly that. And here is the kicker most retail will never appreciate. XRP can scale without bottlenecking. Its escrow mechanism limits supply shocks, and liquidity corridors are already stress-tested for institutional volumes, which means when adoption ramps, there will be no excuse, no narrative, no fear to suppress price, only upward repricing as real demand outstrips the currently available float. And if that doesn't terrify the shorts and excite holders, nothing will, because this is the moment where patience becomes profit and indecision becomes regret. And consider this extreme scenario. Even a fraction of institutional liquidity flowing through XRP corridors, just 5 to 10% of global remittance volume, mathematically triggers multi-digit percentage gains overnight, a scenario so plausible that the SEC's careful structuring of the case and Ripple's measured rollout begins to look like choreography, because history shows that when legal risk is neutralized and infrastructure becomes operational, markets do not trickle, they explode. And if you are watching this thinking, I'll wait for confirmation, you are the person who gets left behind, because conviction pays, hesitation costs, and timing is not just everything, it is survival. And the final warning is this. XRP is about to move in a way that mainstream investors, influencers, and news cycles are not ready for, because by the time the headlines catch up, the liquidity corridors will already be locked in, regulatory frameworks will already be active, and the narrative will have flipped so violently that what seems like aggressive price targets today will be the baseline tomorrow. So if you are holding, if you are paying attention, if you understand what you just heard, prepare. Because the opportunity window is narrower than you think, the stakes are higher than you imagine, and the ripple effect of this strategy is not a theory. It is already in motion, and those who act with insight, speed, and discipline will see what the mainstream cannot, the market cannot, and most importantly, the fear cannot stop. Here's the conclusion, and I'm going to leave you with the kind of clarity most investors will never get, because this is where theory ends and reality begins, and you need to hear it straight. XRP is not a gamble. It is a strategic position in a system that governments, banks, and institutions are quietly being forced to adopt. And Ripple's deployment is no accident. It is methodical, precise, and ruthlessly effective, the kind of plan that can quietly rewrite your financial future if you recognize the signals before the crowd does. And ask yourself this final question. Are you going to sit back and watch history happen? Or are you going to step into the rare position where knowledge, timing, and conviction collide to create opportunity? Because this is exactly what is unfolding right now. Corridors are coming online, adoption is accelerating, legal risk is neutralizing, and liquidity demand is about to shock the system. And if you've stayed this far, if you've followed the data, the signals, and the logic, you now hold the kind of insight most will never see until it's too late. So act with focus, hold with discipline, and prepare to witness XRP not as a coin, not as a token, but as a financial juggernaut reshaping cross-border settlement, because this is bigger than price, bigger than hype, bigger than fear, and it is happening while the world sleeps, and the choice now is yours. Be a spectator or be part of the movement that history will remember, because Ripple has set the stage, the corridors are primed, and the revaluation is coming faster than anyone dares to imagine. And if you are smart, you are already positioning, already informed, and already ready, because the window is closing and the consequences of hesitation are permanent. This is the insider reality that no headline will tell you. And XRP holders, the time to understand, prepare, and act is not tomorrow, not next week. It is now, and that is the truth. The mainstream refuses to report.